Start. So, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. This is a breakout session for the afternoon. Uh, we're here. My name is Gustavo. I'm a Term 2 BIT student. We have the pleasure to receive here Brian Brown. And Brian is an enterprise architect for Trellix, which is a merger company from McAfee and FireEye. He has assisted his customers navigate the transformation IT security landscape, a focus on information security problem strategy and enterprise security architecture using Sabre method is the core of his approach. Uh, as a former information security manager and director of security operations in healthcare, Brian grounds his approach with the background of a practitioner. His experience spans security for devices, networks, cloud technologies, and data. Brian's multidisciplinary background as a 27-year IT professional and architect is complemented by membership in Zaka, SABSA, and YASA global architect community to assist clients with strategy and technology integration. So I welcome Brian. Just a few notes before Brian starts his speech is that we have the Q&A. You have the chat on your right side that you can ask questions. We're going to have a time for Q&A that I'll be taking at the end of after his presentation. So you can ask as many questions as you want. Actually, I provoke you to do it. So Brian, thank you so much again to be here with us. And can continue.
Great. Thank you very much, Gustavo. Really appreciate that. And sorry, I can't see the slides, so I'm trusting that you are going to bring those up for me.
Yeah, I can bring it now.
Let's go.
Okay. Let me get it.
Excellent. While Gustavo is bringing those up, just wanted to say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today at this session. As Gustavo mentioned, we do have the ability to answer questions. I'm going to take about half an hour and talk to you a little bit about what inspires me and my journey in cybersecurity, but we'll have lots of time for questions. In my background, you heard I've been in the industry for a reasonable amount of time. So please feel free to ask me anything about cybersecurity. I'm more than happy to impart what I know and some of my experience, and hopefully I help to inspire you on your own personal journey. So, Gustavo, if you wouldn't mind just flipping to the first slide for me. I was thinking about how I would formulate my presentation and what I would speak to you about. And as I was being introduced to the goals of the Inspire conference, there were a couple of things that really stood out to me, that resonated to me. And I thought, how could I tell a good story? Everyone loves a good story. And I thought that a couple of the things that were, part and parcel of the aspirations, the goals of the Inspire conference really stood out to me. The concept of being visionary, and how does that overlay with what we can do to help people solve their problems. And the last point, redefining resilience, is one of those key focus points that is a kind of a hot topic within the cybersecurity realm these days. So we're going to center point on that column there in the middle of this diagram, and hopefully some of these messages and what I'm going to impart to you will resonate in terms of what your experience has been, or maybe what you would like to do in the future. So where do we begin? Well, I'm going to back up a little bit and tell you about my own personal journey, because it's the story of how I came to my position within my organization that is called Trellix. As Gustavo said, that's the combination of what was known as McAfee and another cybersecurity company called FireEye. But more to the point, it's really a story about my inspiration to better myself professionally within the realm of cybersecurity. So where do we start? Gustavo, could you flip to the next slide for me, please? Now, some of you might be wondering, why do I have a picture of a garbage truck here? This is a talk about cybersecurity, talk about being inspired and motivation, and what is it that's important to take into account as we go on our journeys. And I'm starting with a picture of a garbage truck. That looks kind of funny, I bet you're thinking. But this is where it all started for me in technology. And if we go back a good number of years now, I was a little 3-year-old boy who would run to the window every week when the garbage truck came. Cars were the first thing about technology. Cars, trucks, anything like that was the first thing about technology that fascinated me. And it's always been I would say, a personal aspiration of mine to be connected with technology. And that's going to play itself out in some of the story that I'm going to relate to you. But, even as that young lad of 3 years old, I had a thought, an inspiration, a personal inspiration with technology that started with that garbage truck that would come and visit outside the house every week. In fact, my favorite book at the time was Richard Scarry's Cars and Trucks and Things That Go, right? So that was where my own personal journey with technology started, and the inspiration for a lot of what I do today. Next slide, please. So if we think about, if you think about where our own personal experiences have taken us, the subject we're going to get to eventually is cybersecurity and what that means to me right now. But, if we overlap technology as a theme, I began my journey in computing through my father, actually. So it was a very personal experience because he was actually a professor at the University of Toronto, an academic for a long period of time. And as such, he was conducting research. He was actually a professor of Canadian history. And one of the tools that he used in his career was a computer. He had what you see in front of you, an IBM PC, an original IBM PC, way back in the day, back in the 80s. And as he went through his own personal computing experience, I was the lucky inheritant of some of his former tools. And so that's where I started my journey in computing. And this is back in the days when, in fact, there were no hard disks in the machine. It was run off of 2 floppy drives, exactly like what you see in there, where I had to load up the operating system and then load up whatever program I was going to use, which was probably a little bit more advanced than the young lad that I was at the time could really handle. But it was a seminal moment to me in terms of how I related to the experience of computing. And it was that continuation of the journey in the technological realm, I think, that really started my experience into the world of information technology. And as time went on, I started to upgrade my own computer system. I started to do things like learn a little bit about programming. I was learning about gaming and playing games on my computer and using it for school essays and things of that nature, right? And that type of experience. And it started my path of learning. It started my path of personal exploration into the realm of technology, and the curiosity to learn more really was enabled through that very personal experience from my father, but that very tactile experience with a computing infrastructure. And the reason that was important to me was when I reflect on that now, it made me think about, how did I get influenced? The technology was always a personal interest, right? Starting from that garbage truck and the interest in cars. But there was more than that. There was a personal experience that made it special to me. And that's one of the things that I, as I reflect on my past and how I've gotten to where I am in my realm right now, that I really take to heart, that means a lot to me, is that, what made it impactful and what inspired me was, without even knowing it at the time, was the very personal connection. And if you fast forward a little ways, when I was in my early 20s, I had an opportunity to go out to a racetrack. And a couple of my friends were actually ex-car racers. One of my friends raced in World Sports Prototypes in the early 90s. And given my automotive interests, I was fascinated with the ability to learn more and to go out to a racetrack and be part of an experience that he had where he brought people out to the racetrack. They were hired out by one of the local Porsche dealers to give the Porsche owners an experience on the racetrack rather than just experiencing their cars in the street. So really in the element that they were designed for high performance situations. And I started out very simply. I started out by simply flagging the cars in and out of the pits, on and off the racetrack. And I was lucky enough to have somebody who said, do you want to go out? Do you want to learn more? And through my friend, his name was Dave, Dave took me out and he taught me the basics. He put me in the passenger seat, and through many different avenues and through many different times of being at the racetrack, I graduated from being the student into being the instructor. And that's actually me in the passenger seat of that car, instructing one of our students at an experience that we call Driver for a Day. And this is very parallel in concept in terms of my journey with technology. I mentioned that personal relationship that I had with the computing and technology experience through my father. And then if you take that same analogy into what happened in my experience on the racetrack and being a driving instructor, the common element is that I had a good mentor. I had somebody who said, I'm going to put some trust and faith in you, and I'm going to help enable you. I'm going to help you learn. I'm going to take you on a journey, and you can make of it what you want. And through that experience, I was provided opportunities to really formulate who I am and formulate my views on the world and technology, and how technology can be an enabler, how it can help people. And it was a great experience for me. I actually went to racing school. I got my racing license and participated in a number of regional races along with being a driving instructor. And we had the opportunity to be hired out by Ferrari Owners Club of Ontario, the Lamborghini Owners Club of Ontario. And so I got to experience some fantastic cars in a great setting. But what was really important to me was the ability to transfer what I knew to other people. That's what made the experience special. And that's the lesson that I've carried over into my professional life. And Gustavo, if you wouldn't mind switching to the next slide for me, please. As I went through my own journey in cybersecurity, I started out actually being a systems administrator in Toronto. I used to live in Toronto. I lived there for 37 years. And I started as a systems administrator at U of T, actually. I was managing a network for a professor in the Faculty of Medicine. And I learned a lot. I learned more about computing and networking. And this is at a time when the internet was still actually an emerging technology. And discovering, browsing the web for the very first time was hugely exciting. And to be provided that opportunity to kind of be on the front lines of that emerging technology was incredibly exciting and impactful. But it helped me understand where I wanted to focus my career aspirations. And I started out as that sysadmin at U of T. I migrated over into a network at the University Health Network in Toronto, which is a consortium of 5 hospitals. And managed the environment there. It's where I became director of operations and cybersecurity at the time. Obviously, the landscape was a little bit different. We're talking about the late 1990s. Things were a little bit different from a threat landscape perspective than they are now. But it was seminal to how I built my career. Was opportunities were provided to me, and along that same path, and keeping in line with the concept of mentoring, again, I was very fortunate to have somebody who put some faith and trust in me, who acted as a mentor and imparted to me a lot of knowledge and wisdom. And that gentleman's name was Tom. Tom was a great mentor, and he taught me a lot about what I knew of the IT fundamentals and security fundamentals that, still hold true in my career almost, 25 or close to 30 years later. And as I went through my own personal experience in my career, at every stage, reflecting on that now and looking back on it now, I've recognized the impact that mentors have had to me. And one of the most important lessons that I learned through the mentorship that I was given the opportunity to participate in as a mentee most of the time was what you see in front of you. It was a principle that a gentleman named Wayne Anderson, who I worked with at McAfee, brought to my attention. And this is by a gentleman named Simon Sinek, who some of you may know. And he has a principle called the Golden Circle Principle. And really what it comes down to is that in any situation, whether you are dealing with a business colleague, whether you are in a learning scenario, whether you're in a teaching scenario, many people start with the what and work their way into the how and the why. So what is it that we're doing? How do we do it? And why do we do it? And the example that Simon Sinek quotes is, one of Apple. And there's a difference in messaging or principle between starting with what and starting with why. And when you think about the way that you might look at a computing experience, right? If I just start with what and say, I've got a computer, and how I got this computer is that I built it out of these parts: a CPU, RAM, and disk. And this is important or useful to you, right? That's one type of communication. It's one type of message. But if we look at it from the inside out and we start with why, and you think about how, for example, a company like Apple markets itself, their philosophy comes out from the start. They say, we believe that technology and computing can change your world and make your life better. We build fantastic machines which enable you to experience computing in a very personal way. And through that, we deliver out a Mac laptop. That's a very different type of message. And I really took that to heart. I took that to heart of the starting with why principle in terms of how I try and interact with my business colleagues, how I interact with my customers now in a sales role that I'm at Trellix. And I think it's very important. It kind of overlays with the concept of mentoring. It's about starting with the fundamental principles of imparting knowledge and wisdom. It's not about what we do. What we do is important, there's no question, but that's the end result. If we start with a fundamental belief and we enable others through that fundamental belief, then we achieve a better outcome. The reason that this is important and where this overlaps in the realm of cybersecurity, Gustavo, if you wouldn't mind flipping to the next slide, is that in the cyber world, in security in particular, we are inundated with data. Every single day, there are a growing number of cyber threats. And you think about all the activity that we see as the general public, right? We see that this company was breached. There's a cyber attack that has been targeted towards a specific industry. I'm sure that you can come up with things that you've heard about, you've read about, like the Colonial Pipeline situation that happened last fall, a targeted attack against an oil and gas distribution company in the southeastern US, which the net effect from a general population perspective was that people started panicking. They started running to the pumps with cans so that they could hoard some gas in case the gas supplies ran out. All of this started from a cyber attack on one organization. And what we have in cybersecurity is a challenge. It's a fundamental challenge grounded on that bottom part of this triangle, which is data. There's so much data that in the world of cyber, many organizations really don't know where to begin. They don't know what's important. They don't know how to start taking that data and turning it into meaningful intelligence. And even as a representative of an industry that has tooling and sells technology and products to try and help overcome part of this situation, it's still a challenge. Every business is now a cyber business. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, it doesn't matter whether you're a financial institution delivering out services to hundreds or thousands or millions of customers. It doesn't matter whether you manufacture products like shingles or tires. It doesn't matter whether you're in healthcare. Every organization is a cyber organization. And companies are drowning in seas of data. They're drowning in seas of data about threats. They're drowning in seas of log data that they have, that they're collecting internally, trying to understand whether or not they are subject to a threat, what the potential impact is to their organization. And they're trying to turn all of that into intelligence. They're trying to use tools that my organization and many other organizations provide to turn data into intelligence. And that is partly a technological problem. Partly it's a human problem. It's a scale problem, because we need to have a certain amount of knowledge. Cyber threat defenders have to understand not just that there is a threat, not what we call an indicator of compromise, or IOC, that is potentially impacting an environment. They have to know what to do about it. And so we can talk about programmatic structures. Some of my training, with organizations and bodies like ISACA and SABSA, says that there's a programmatic structure to an information security program that a CISO or a person of cyber influence will institute within an organization. Their real goal is to try and take data, turn it into intelligence. But I would argue that the success for companies that are really cyber aware, the success for companies that have really overcome the cyber challenge, or at least made the situation better, is that they turn data into intelligence and that intelligence into wisdom. That's why we have that triangle there, because there's a volume of capacity and capability, as I like to say, that goes within each one of those structures. And really the tip of the iceberg, the top of the pyramid, that wisdom level, ultimately is a human characteristic. It's about taking data, turning it into intelligence through the application of external threat intel, through local log gathering and understanding your own context within your cyber realm. What is the potential impact of this threat given my assets, the vulnerabilities that I am potentially subject to, the threats that are inbound? Are they applicable in my cloud environment and what happens on-prem? But ultimately, every cyber program, everyone in the cyber industry is trying to get to wisdom. And that's knowing what to do about it. It's knowing how to respond to a threat. It's knowing how to react to the situation that is unique to you as an organization, unique to you in terms of your role, potentially as an analyst in the SOC, as a CISO who's looking at things from a broader perspective, as an operator who's responsible for technologies that deploy cyber defenses. All of this comes down to knowing how to react and respond. And that's the top of the pyramid. That's that wisdom pillar. And what I want you to think about, what has been impactful for me personally, is how we go through that journey. How I got to my place of being knowledgeable and being experienced was through the opportunities that my mentors provided to me. I have learned a lot through them and through those teachings. Do we study? Do we look at white papers? Absolutely. Do we read about the latest cyber threats and try and become educated through that, through more traditional methods of book learning and analysis and research? Absolutely. It's a critical part of the job. But what really makes a difference and an impact, at least in my personal experience, is the guidance and the wisdom of mentors. And having those people who are key leaders who impart that wisdom to me has allowed me to take that into my own personal experience to better myself in my career. And I think it's a general principle that we need to adhere to in cyber, right? We need more than threat intelligence. We need a lot less data. We need the data, but we need to focus it in important ways. And we need to take that up into intelligence and drive it into wisdom and use that human element, use that human experience. And actually, it's funny because some of my own colleagues are also speaking at the Inspire conference this year. Celeste Freilich was our chief data scientist at McAfee. She's one of the speakers at Inspire. Paula Greaves, Vishwas Manral, some of my colleagues and ex-colleagues. Every one of those people that I just mentioned have imparted wisdom to me. And so I encourage you to take a look at some of their sessions because they're great. They have their own unique message to tell you, but wisdom is really where it's at through mentorship. That's what's made the difference for me in my career. And also, I think what we need to do in the realm of cybersecurity. Could you flip to the next slide, please, Gustavo? So how do we get there? This is the SABSA matrix. SABSA stands for Sherwood Applied Business Security Architecture. That's a big mouthful, but why is this impactful? This is something that, sorry, it's a bit of an eye chart. Feel free to go out and look up sabsa.org and you'll see the matrix there. You might be able to see it in a little bit better detail than what comes across on the screen. But this is something that really excites me. And you might look at this and go, okay, that's kind of strange. Why does this matrix here, with all these words and all these, columns and rows, why does this excite this guy? Well, it excites me because this is something that allows me to communicate. It allows me to formulate thought. It allows me to take what are data points, what are important aspects in cybersecurity, what does the threat landscape look like? What are the most significant and impactful threats? How do we map out threat actor activity against the MITRE attack framework? We need some type of communication tool. We need architectures, we need frameworks in order to communicate in a common vernacular, in order to communicate successfully. To me, this is my bridge between the technical world and the human world so that I can communicate with a senior leader who's a CIO or a CISO and really speak to them about their concerns from a business context where they're driven by pressures like budget, like reporting to a board structure. That's a very different conversation in cyber than somebody who's a SOC analyst, right? Who's monitoring a threat dashboard, who's monitoring their defensive controls on a daily basis. We need a structured way. We need a way to communicate successfully, regardless of who we're talking to, because cyber is a big problem. It's a big problem in organizations, and we need to figure out a way to impart our wisdom, not just have data points, not just turn it into intelligence, but have that wisdom of how we communicate. And so something like this, the SABSA framework, there are many different models and architectures that are used to try and formulate what is the cyber landscape and control frameworks and incident response playbooks. It's great. What I'd encourage you to do if you are interested or in the cyber realm is understand how things like frameworks and standards can be impactful, how they can be used as communication tools. That's my little mentorship tip, hopefully for you, because it's made a big difference for me. It's changed my focus and it's changed my ability to communicate. And that comes back to that human issue within cyber. We have to have that level of wisdom and understanding and impart it amongst components of our architecture. We have to tell our architecture at a technical level what is an appropriate response, how to respond, when to respond, how much to respond. We can't simply say we're under cyber attack and turn the lights off. That doesn't work, right? Business operations have to continue. We have to respond proportionally. We have to know what to do in a given situation, to have the tools to assess, to communicate, and to be able to respond the right way at the right time. And that's really the biggest challenge in cyber, is knowing what to do. That's why wisdom and mentorship really are impactful in terms of an approach. It's not just tools, it's people and process. All three of those things really have to go together, regardless of what we're dealing with in the realm of cyber. So just to leave you with, kind of some final thoughts. Gustavo, next slide, please. This is an example of a maturity model, right? And this is another tool that we use to communicate with our customers. The ultimate outcome in the realm of cyber is that we're trying to defend, we're trying to protect whatever it is important to us as an entity, as an organization, as a business, as a government, and quite frankly, protect ourselves as a population. So regardless of your mission in cyber, there has to be some type of measurement, some architecture, some standards, some frameworks, and the interest and the ability to make yourself better, to accelerate up the scale, to look at things like maturity models, to look at what are our tangible benefits that we can achieve at each stage of our maturity journey, to map that out. And that really requires information, data, analysis. It also requires imparting wisdom. It requires a human input. And that's one of the things that I hope you take away from this is that, cybersecurity is often looked at as a very technical profession. It absolutely is. There's a lot of technical background knowledge that's necessary to play any one of those roles that I talked about, to be a data analyst, to be a SOC analyst, to be a CISO. You have to understand a lot of technical aspects, but you also have to bring in the human element. And I hope that you will take inspiration from my own personal journey and try and think about how you can help mentor those around you. That's what's made a big difference to me personally in my career. And I really hope that through some of this story, you take that to heart and think about how you can help mentor in the realm of cyber. Don't be afraid to go out and make a personal connection, to say, I don't think this is right, or what if we looked at this a different way? Or give someone an opportunity who's around you to express their opinion, because we need that in order to be successful. If we're going to make, each one of these steps that you see in front of you real and impactful, regardless of your role, we need to bring in the human element. And mentorship, to me, is one of those key things that's going to help enable that in the realm of cyber. So thank you very much. I really hope you enjoyed my speech, my talk. If you'd like to connect with me, please feel free to do so. But Gustavo, we have plenty of time for Q&A. So
That's great.
Have we had anything that's come in?
No, I cannot see the questions right now, but I'll stop sharing and I'm going to look at the questions, see the comments from the guys.
Great, thank you.
Let's see.
And like I said, please feel free to ask me literally anything.
Excellent presentation. Excellent. I got really inspired.
Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Actually, I got just a quick one. How fast would you go on that track? How fast would you go on those Porsche?
So I was debating about what picture to put up there. I had another picture which was of a different car that I taught in. And it was a different Porsche because we were aligned with a Porsche dealership. I actually worked for Porsche Cars North America as a driving instructor for a little while. So most of my experience has been in Porsche vehicles. How fast would we go? Well, it would depend on the racetrack that we were at, because the laws of physics always apply. We would start our students out on a smaller track configuration, quite frankly, to limit their speed, because sometimes the enthusiasm got the better of them. So at the smaller configuration of the track, we would hit about 130, 140 kilometers an hour, which doesn't sound very fast. But one of the things I think you might want to think about is the fact that we would take a right angle corner. So think of, coming up to a stoplight and turning right. And you think about the speed that you do that. Try and do that at 80 kilometers an hour. It's a little bit different experience.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And so it's not necessarily about the outright speed. It's about how you use the physics and the G-forces. And I would take students out and they would say, oh, well, we're not going to go that fast. And they would literally be screaming in fear when we would go around that right-hander, that 90-degree right-hander at 80 kilometers an hour, because they thought we were going to crash. So it's about the experience. On the big track, we would take the advanced group out at a track called Mossport, which is just outside of Toronto. And they actually used to host Grand Prix races there in the 1970s. And we would hit about 220, 240 up the back straight because it's a very long straight. So we got the space to be able to use the capability of the vehicle. But the funny story is that in another car, not the one that you saw, but a race prepped car. So fortunately, it had a roll cage and everything. I was off the track backwards at 160 kilometers an hour in the passenger seat when a student made a mistake.
Oh,
Fortunately, everything was fine and didn't hit anything. But yeah, I've had some interesting experiences on the racetrack, so it was a lot of fun. Lots of fun.
oh, that's good. Okay, everyone, please put your question on the chat. We have some questions coming in. Actually, we have one from Todd. Hello, Todd. How are zero-day exploits handled? Would you even know if a zero-day has been used against you until exploit itself is discovered?
Yeah.
Now you cut it out a little bit. I think we lost him. Just a second, guys. I think we had a connection problem there. You're back.
Here? Okay.
Yeah, you're back now.
All right. Thank you.
We lost you for a second.
It happens to everybody, unfortunately.
Yeah, nowadays unfortunately it's common. Yes.
We've all come to accept it. So the question was, how are 0 days handled? Okay.
Yeah.
Look, let's be honest. 0 days are a problem, right? And so even the concept of a 0 day and thinking about, the potential impact of something that is utterly unknown. These days, there are a number of different methodologies that companies like myself and my company, Trellix, not me personally, but my company and others are using to combat 0 day. The best types of methodologies that we have at our fingertips these days come down to things like machine learning modeling. So it could be deep learning modeling, it could be artificial intelligence, layered modeling. Go check out Celeste Freilich's talks because that's her area of specialty is the data science behind that. But 0 days inherently are unknown. That's hence their name, 0 day. We don't know anything about them. So the security industry looks at that not as a direct relationship of something we can identify. It's not like we can say, this is what a 0 day looks like, because quite frankly, we don't know what it looks like. We don't know what the entity, the vulnerability really is. And as a result, the best that we can do is look for things that are behavioral, characteristics. And our most effective way of doing that is through machine learning, through artificial intelligence, through deep learning modeling. That's the state of the industry right now, effectively, is to look for things that we believe are indicators of suspicion. So not an indicator of compromise, but what I like to call an indicator of suspicion. It leads a threat hunter, it leads a SOC analyst down a path to say, I believe that there's something that's not right. And it's kind of interesting because it very much aligns with that concept that I was talking about, which is the human element. The best threat hunters that exist anywhere, in any organization, in public and private industry, it doesn't matter who they are. They use their intuition. And unfortunately, we're not at the point where machines can have the level of intuition that humans can. So 0 days still happen. They still occur. And that's combined with that other concept that I depicted in the triangle, which is even if we had the best threat hunters, there's too much data. And so the only way to do things at scale is to leverage the technology and to use things like machine learning in order to surface those to this point. I think until we get to the days of quantum computing, which quite frankly scare me a little bit, encryption will become a thing of the past because we'll be able to break every known encryption algorithm instantaneously with quantum computing. And not really, but close. I think until we get to that point, we're using the most effective technologies that we have available to us. And many times that requires a level of compute power that's only delivered through the cloud. So cloud enabled detection and analysis is common because it's impossible to set up the infrastructure that's necessary to mine those behaviors effectively at scale these days. That's why vendors like ourselves and many others are turning to the cloud as a delivery mechanism, as a tool to help us with the analysis problem.
Excellent. Even quantum computing is done through the cloud nowadays. It's starting.
Yes.
But on that path, normally you say that you have like AI to detect some suspicions or intuition, right? What
Yes.
actually, if you have an intuition, what do you actually act on it, or
Well,
how?
that's and again, we're kind of hitting many of the talking points that I tried to surface in my presentation. It's about knowing how to respond. It's about knowing how to respond, what I like to call proportionately, because there can be things that look suspicious that, no matter what tool you use, whether it's a data analysis tool, whether you're exporting data into traditional data analytics tools like SAS, for example. Some customers do that, right? They don't just rely on the tool sets that security vendors provide. Maybe they've got their own data lake and they run their own analysis on top of that. They've used a data scientist to help build some modeling that they feel brings and surfaces better results. Even in that situation, even in the situation where we have a very advanced threat hunter who has a lot of knowledge and can leverage their intuition, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have a conclusive proof that there's bad activity. And the interesting thing that you have to think about is that even in the face of bad activity, an organization doesn't simply just shut the door. They don't turn the machines off. It can't. It's not possible because everything stops. And so even in a situation where we expose a 0 day, even in a situation where we expose threat actor activity, and we know that data exfiltration is happening, we have to understand whether or not we're going to take the very drastic measure and pull the plug, or are we going to let things unfold to some degree? This is often what happens, so that we can watch for the types of activities, and we assume a level of risk. We take that on. It's our risk appetite. It actually tends to grow at that point, our risk appetite, to be able to watch the threat actor activity, because part of what becomes important is the lessons learned. If we simply shut the door and turn off the threat actor, all right, forensics experts will tell you this, you lose scope and you lose sight. And what that means is that 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years later, you're probably going to be subject to the same type of activity. And this has happened over and over again. We see this all the time. Hey, we were subject to a breach and we shut it down, right? So they're gone for now, but the organization never goes back and says, let's do some root cause. Let's really understand how they looked at our environment, their reconnaissance activities. How did they get into our environment? How did they open the door? How did they get an exploit in? And how did they actually perform their activities inside my environment? If you just close things down, you lose scope to that. So many times the response is, okay, we know that they're trying to exfiltrate data. So we'll shut the data door, but we're not necessarily going to just pull the plug on them because we want to learn. We need to learn. They've obviously figured out something we don't know. So, without that telemetry, without that forensic capability, you can't make yourself better. And that's the challenge, right?
Yeah. Very interesting. We have other questions here from Celestine. What was the most challenging times in your career journey? How did you navigate that phase?
Yeah, great question. Great question. And I'll be very honest with you about this. I worked for McAfee, and many of you probably know the name, right? And one of the reasons that you know the name is that the organization was around for a very long time. So putting aside the exploits of our former founder and some of his videos on YouTube, because he's an interesting character.
Yeah.
We had to deal with that too. That was pretty challenging. You likely know the name of McAfee because we invented antivirus. Our organization invented that technology. Interesting factoid for you. On the day that John McAfee introduced McAfee AV back in 1987, how many viruses, how many exploits did it protect against? Now, we can't get an interactive response. Normally, I love to pose this to an interactive audience and see what we get. We get answers from, 50, 100, 1,000. The answer is actually 0. On the day that it was released, it protected against absolutely nothing.
I didn't know that. That's new for me.
It spurred a whole industry, and today we call it EPP. We call it endpoint protection. Why this is relevant to the question? This is not anything that's not public news, but we had a hard situation, and this is also kind of related to that aspect of trying to figure out what a threat actor is doing. We had a situation a number of years ago where there was an exploit that was discovered. And as a result of that exploit, we published an update to our antivirus subsystem. Now, the unfortunate part about that update was that it also blocked access to a number of Windows system DLLs. And so our customers said, oh, well, we've got a threat, right? We hear about the latest threat, and whether it's DarkSide, which was the threat actor in the Colonial Pipelines attack, whether it's APT29, whether it's somebody who, Ryuk ransomware, like any of these threat actor names or these campaigns that you might have heard about, right? In any situation, we develop, hopefully, what is a mitigation response. In this case, it was an antivirus update. And our customers said, well, this is a big problem. We don't want to be exposed to this vulnerability. So we're going to go and apply the update. And in the course of a few hours, we literally had thousands, because we had over 40,000 customers at the time. We had thousands of customers' infrastructures start to go down.
Oh my goodness.
Okay? It's a hard position to be in. And you wear that on your back for a long time, right? We took businesses offline. That doesn't make you very popular.
No, okay? For sure not.
That was probably one of the most challenging things that we as an organization ever had to deal with. And that's a situation where you have to look at what do we see, what do we know, and what are we going to do about it, and measure that out very carefully. And in the scenario that we as an organization were placed in, we didn't execute the way that we should have. And the reality is, cyber is still human. Threat actors are humans who are taking advantage of technology, but they have their own story. They have their own attack methodology. They do what they do for their own motivations and through their own means. They use technology to get to that end. But they have a story, a human story, as much as we do. We as defenders or security professionals or a company that provides security solutions have to figure out the human impact, have to account for that, have to bring it in every step. And we dropped the ball, quite frankly. It was a challenging time to be part of an organization who was responsible for business impact, right? Threat actors, if they take somebody offline, they don't care. They're thousands of miles away. It makes no difference to them. But for us as a security vendor, that was really hurtful. It was, it's a point of pride, but it was hurtful to us personally. And it's hard to be that person who has to stand up in front of somebody and wear that, to own it and say, I understand. And you fall on your sword, you say you're sorry, and you help them. And key lesson, again, everybody makes mistakes, even those who are in leadership positions, even mentors, and you have to own it. You have to own it and wear it and move forward, right? Be a partner with the people that you're working with.
And learn from it, right?
Learn from it. We learned a lot.
No, that's good. We have another question there from Rita Gallardo. what are the certifications needed to be in the cybersecurity field?
Yeah, great question. Great question. Look, when I started, I had nothing. Now, I was fortunate that I probably came up at a time when things like certifications were not viewed the same way as they are now. Over time, they have grown in prominence. And you got to remember, cyber is still, quite frankly, a relatively new industry. It's a relatively new concept, even, quite frankly. The fundamental principles of business have been well established literally for over 100 years. Structures like a board, the company structure, organizational structures, business motions, processes, things like that have existed for a long time. Cyber's not like that. Cyber has really only become an industry, a capability that is important and impactful, quite frankly, in the last 30 years. So I've kind of grown up with the evolution of cyber in that period of time. And over time, what has been recognized is that we can impart that knowledge, we can share, we can learn from each other. And so, to directly answer the question, what is most impactful or what do you need? You don't technically need anything. And it's often the case that organizations like mine, like many other technology providers, I'm not going to name them, but you probably think of who they are. As a large M company out of Seattle, for example, they will go and they will hire students directly out of university who are taking cyber programs. You don't actually need to have certification necessarily. Now, if you're already out in the workforce, it's a little bit of a different story. The certification is the proof that you are, you have some knowledge and experience beyond just, hey, I've been working for this company for 3 years. And so what is necessary? It's hard to give you a direct answer. Good places to start are look up certification from governing bodies, things like ISACA. They tend to be more at the programmatic level and higher level. There are companies like GIAC, like GIAC, SANS. SANS certification is another great place to start. ISC or ISC squared. There are so many things that you can do to get involved. And part of what you need from a certification perspective is predicated on what you want to do. So if I want to work in a SOC, I want to be a threat hunter, right? I want to be an analyst. Then things like a SANS certification are most important. If your goal, if your interest is to become a CISO, then you probably want to spend your time somewhere else. Probably something like ISACA would be a better type of certification to aspire to if that is your goal within the realm of cyber. So it kind of depends on what you want to do. I want to be an analyst. I want to be, just an IT operator, having base level operating system certifications for Microsoft. These days having cloud certs, AWS, Azure, GCP, all of those things are very important things to have. Don't ever underestimate the value of just the fundamentals. I was a Unix sysadmin. That's where I cut my teeth in the first parts of my career back in the mid 1990s. And I still use some of that knowledge today, even 30 years later. So just having those base level certifications from an operating system perspective, very valuable. But look at security related organizations and bodies like GIAC, like SANS, like ISACA, like ISC squared, and think about what you are targeting, what you are shooting for. Because if you want to be an analyst and you want to do threat hunting, and that's really what interests you, you want to reverse engineer malware, ISACA certifications are not where you want to spend your time. You want to look at something like SANS, for example. So it kind of depends. Hopefully that's giving you a little bit of guidance. If you want to ask some more targeted questions based on that, feel free to reach out to me.
Yes, please reach out. You can connect in through LinkedIn, and you go to his bios and it has all the contact information there.
Yeah, please do.
So I think we'll ask one more question before we wrap up.
Sure.
Yes, now you mentioned that cybersecurity is quite new, still quite new, right? So just a quick one. I think there's still some lack of professionals in the market. What is your view in regards to that?
So, in the sense of the people that you encounter aren't as experienced as they need to be, or that we don't have enough people.
Not exactly. First one, not having enough people,
Yeah,
and the one that are there in the market have not enough experience. No?
right. Yeah, and look, because there is so much data to deal with, because there's so much to understand. It's challenging. It's challenging to keep on top of it. It's challenging to know. No one can know everything. So I think it's one of the things that inspires me, along with the theme of the conference, is there's always something new to learn. There's always something that's interesting, and so many different avenues, kind of along the training discussion that we were just having, of where you can go within the realm of cyber. Many different options. Um, so look, the analyst community, Gartner and those who we turn to as kind of reference points have said there's a shortage of approximately 3 million cyber professionals right now. And that's true, right? The career path and those who are along the information technology line in terms of what they are doing, there aren't enough of them. Business, in terms of its drive and use of technology, has far eclipsed the resource pool that's available. So there is a shortage. There will be a shortage for a long time. If you're looking for a guaranteed career for the next 10 years that pays quite well, cybersecurity is a really good place to be right now. And like I said, many options for you to take advantage of depending on what your interest is in. The other aspect is that, in part because we are a relatively immature industry, still learning a lot, there's a lot of knowledge that is not being imparted to the few people who exist. It's a challenge. It's a challenge to learn from each other. In part, that's a cultural thing within the industry because, look, if I'm protecting my organization, I work for a bank, for example. I'm not going to go and talk about how I'm protecting my bank. It's kind of like, I'm not going to give away the secret for Coke, Coca-Cola, any more than I'm going to give away my secrets for how I keep my infrastructure safe. So, it's a bit of a challenge in our industry because culturally we're taught, don't talk, don't communicate. I take the opposite approach. I'm fortunate to be in more of an educational perspective or position in terms of my role, so it's a bit easier for me to say this. But everyone has to focus on learning and experiencing and becoming better, becoming more knowledgeable is part and parcel of what we have to do within cyber because there's too much to deal with and there's too few of us, quite frankly. So good opportunity, but expect to get into things and try and learn as much as you can.
Excellent. Very good, Brian. Very good. Oh man, I wish I could stay here chatting the whole afternoon, but unfortunately, we don't have that time, and we need to move on, keep on with the conference. So thanks a lot, Brian, for taking your time. And actually, I learned a lot from your presentation, from your actually lots of tips. I really like the mentorship. We sometimes people don't gather the importance of mentorship.
Yes.
And you really emphasize that, and that's really good. That's really good. Appreciate it. Much appreciate.
Thank
People are
you.
sending lots of thank you message, inspiring. Thank you, Brian. That was very insightful. Excellent. I would say thanks a lot. And I would say people can reach Brian, can go to his bio in the Hublot platform and
Please.
connect with him.
Thank you
Also,
very much. Really
yeah.
appreciate the opportunity. I really appreciate all the questions, and please feel free to reach out, ask me anything. And I'm very honored to have the opportunity and enjoy the rest of the conference. You've got some great speakers.
Thank you, Brian. For the attendees, you can move to the stage and go to the alumni panel. So I encourage you guys to go there. So once again, Brian, thank you so much, man.
Thank you for the opportunity. Have a good day, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.